Hello and welcome to Apologetics 101. I'm your host Brian, and welcome to another heat problem video. This one's going to be released at the same time as my last one, which is the geothermal feedback model and evidential defense. This one's going to be called the geothermal feedback model a critical defense, and this is going to be primarily focused on responding to certain critics that have responded to my geothermal feedback model, and basically it's going to be a shorter video, but it is going to comprise the main arguments that the critics are using and talking about. I'm also going to talk about some competing models, things like that as well in the video. Again, like all my geothermal feedback model, I'm presenting slide presentations. So without further ado, let's dive in. All right. Like I said, we're going to be dealing with several critics that responded to my particular model. One particular critic, which I call AB, his actual YouTube designation is Amazing Blue. I just shortened it down to AB. And another critic named Graham, and a few other responses that came my way, and I'm going to be responding to them in this video. All right, so let's continue on. Let's start off here. All right, AB's rhetorical trilemma. Originally, I thought that AB was trying to do a reductio ad absurdum argument, where he was, assume my position in order to argue against it. Since I'm taking the rate level research, he was trying to use Dr. Andrew Snelling's research on polonium halos and polonium radio halos and fission tracks, except he was only taking the first half of that argument. The second half of the argument, which Dr. Snelling, which Dr. Snelling had argued. We'll talk more about that later, but essentially, Dr. Andrew Snelling did not argue another half of that argument, which he actually argued for a mechanism fast enough to remove the heat. But Avery took the first half of that argument of annulling fission tracks and polonium halos and ran with that. So essentially, and so I began to call this AB's rhetorical trilemma, or AB's trilemma, however you want to put it. And we're going to talk more about why I call it a trilemma, because it's essentially a rhetorical trap. It's trying to back me up into a rhetorical corner, but we'll get into that in a little bit. All right, the argument. The upper crust is enriched with radioisotopes. This is what AB has argued. And the rate team has discovered that he put discovered in quotes that polonium radiohalo and fission tracks exist in the rock record as quote unquote evidence of accelerated decay. Obviously, he doesn't take that position. And these annul at high temperatures, 300, 350 degrees Celsius, for fission tracks and zircon crystals. I think I put that in there, yeah, in brackets. For fission tracks and zircon crystals, and 400 to 500 degrees Celsius in polonium radiohalos. In the modern non-advected crust, upper crust, these types, the all caps is his, upper crust, these types of evidence still exist, which should have been destroyed if and happened, and if these got that hot. Thus, the heat would have been enough to melt the crust, and so a different cooling mechanism would be needed for the upper crust, leaving a conduction-only approach to get rid of the heat in the upper crust. But because conduction is a way too slow, it wouldn't get rid of the heat fast enough, thus melting the crust. I assume this is directly from one of his replies. I think it is. It looks like it is. If not, I just simply summarize the argument. But I think that's directly from his argument. That's why he puts evidence in quotes and discovered in quotes. All right. AB's rhetorical trilemma. Okay, the trilemma. This is what the trilemma is essentially doing. A trilemma is basically a way of trying to corner you into the only three options when there could be a fourth option exists. Um, it's unlike a false dilemma because a false dilemma can actually not just try to corner you to two options restrictively, but also try to but might also include contradictory points or not non-contradictory points, like they don't contradict each other, so there could be other alternatives. Trilemma, obviously, it wouldn't be contradictory points exactly, but with a trilemma, the person is trying to corner you into kind of a three-option type deal. Sometimes there might only be three options, but in this case, it's a rhetorical trick in order to get me backed up into a corner where my responses are where I basically essentially plead no contest to the argument, essentially how that works. There's actually a way out of this trilemma that he set up because it's actually not the case, but we'll get into that. So essentially, it's like this: if I argue I have a mechanism fast enough to get rid of the heat, AB asks, "What cooling mechanism do I have to cool the non-advected crust?" If I say advection is the mechanism that is fast enough to move the heated rock, AB responds with strawman argument. I'm talking about the non-advected crust. If I give any suggestion at all, then AB simply references that mechanism isn't fast enough, since what can be faster than advection, which is already several orders of magnitude faster than current processes under catastrophic conditions. In other words, it's designed to trick me to suggesting something else that would not be nowhere near as fast as advection, and thus be able to say, nope, that wouldn't be enough to cool off the crust. Except advection is enough to cool off the crust, but he assumes that it isn't because he says that the non-advected crust needs to be cool. So the idea is that non-advected crust would be hot enough to melt the crust and destroy the polonium halos and fission tracks and other minerals like zircons, and yet not have anything that can cool them off beyond what's been advected. Now we're going to show a response to this. The argument is actually circular. In addition to being circular, it's also winds up, like I said, it's not a reductio ad absurdum. If it was, it would avoid circular reasoning, but it's not a non-effective not a reductio ad absurdum, so it doesn't avoid circular reasoning. It does actually have circular reasoning in it, but it also violates a branch in physics, as we're going to see later, called rheology. So we're going to get into all that. All right. My response: AB's trilemma is ultimately a circular argument, like I said, and not a true reductio ad absurdum argument. Since he's not fully assuming the right team's argument, nor mine, Dr. Andrew Snelling posited a twofold argument. Polonium radiohalos and fission tracks are the result of accelerated nuclear decay, so we know cellular decay had happened, but these features annul at very high temperatures, which by inference would mean that a mechanism must have existed. I'm going to quote Dr. Andrew Snelling later for this. Must have existed that can remove the heat fast enough before these features were destroyed, suggesting an unknown mechanism at the time of this discovery. AB and other critics like the annulling part of what Andrew Snelling had to say, but then forget the other half of that argument. And by forget, I should have put that in quotes because I don't really mean that they actually don't know that Dr. Andrew Snelling said that. They do, but because that part they don't agree with and they don't like, they leave that part out. But you have to put that in there because the whole point that Dr. Andrew Snelling is making is that there must have been a mechanism in existence, whether we know about it or not, that was fast enough to remove the heat. That's the whole point that he's making. So you can't remove one half and without destroying the other half. You have to have both halves of that argument. It's a twofold argument. In which case they just kind of like the annulling part, but they remove the part that they don't like, the part which shows that this is evidence for accelerated nuclear decay. Um, what AB has done is simply assumed his conclusion. He's arguing in a circle, ignoring the other half of the argument. He's assumed, simply put, that non-advected crust would heat up to the same degree, but despite AB's denial of this, he's assuming the advection isn't fast enough to get rid of the heat before the rest of the crust is heated up in the same manner. Now, he has denied this, but that is what he's doing. All right, here's a quote from Dr. Andrew Snelling. However, the existence of the polonium and uranium-238 radiohalos together, if generated concurrently, implies nuclear decay had to have been accelerated by probably at least 6 orders of magnitude during the flood year. The enormous amount of heat generated by this accelerated nuclear decay adds considerable to the heat problem. To put the heat problem in perspective, we can quickly do a rough estimate of the effect of just the accelerated nuclear decay, say 500 million years worth at today's rates, but instead taking place in a single year, the flood year. This is equivalent to a temperature rise of more than 22,000 degrees Celsius, which is sufficient, of course, to vaporize a granite pluton many times over. However, the reality of the existence of the polonium and uranium-238 radiohalos in biotite crystals in granite rocks is evidence that removal of all this heat has been not been an insurmountable problem. That's his words. It's not been an insurmountable problem. If there had been accelerated decay, incredible amounts of heat must have somehow been removed rapidly by process or processes that we may not have yet discovered or understood. Now that means up to then. It doesn't mean now and forever. Some reason they take this to be now and forever, but that doesn't mean now and forever. It just means at the time that Dr. Andrew Snelling is writing this, it's not known. We now know it to be advection, but at that time they did not know what it was. All right, there has been accelerated decay, incredible amounts of heat must have somehow been removed rapidly by processes that we have not yet discovered or understood, for otherwise these rocks and the halos in them would have been vaporized. In other words, it's a twofold argument that he's making there. Okay, my response. Essentially, AB's argument is not a true reductor ad absurdum argument, and so it has been has AB assuming his conclusion. He takes part of what Dr. Snelling says about annulling temperatures of those minerals at high temperatures, but then doesn't take the other half of Snelling's argument, which shows that accelerated nuclear decay must have occurred, and thus, by inference, there must have been a mechanism fast enough, because he actually says that, it has to be fast enough to get rid of the heat. Talking about Andrew Snelling actually says that fast enough to get rid of the heat within the flood year that could outpace the heat's generation of it. My model provides such a mechanism. However, AB is forced to assume that the non-advected crust got as hot as the advected crust, and despite what he tries to argue, he is assuming that advection is not fast enough to remove the heat before this happens to the non-advected crust that hasn't been advected yet. This turns AB's argument into a circular reasoning. He's simply assuming his conclusion instead of demonstrating it. Okay. Furthermore, AB's argument also ignores a major branch in physics called rheology. It is a branch in physics. Rheology is the branch of physics that studies how materials deform and flow when forces are applied to them. In other words, rheology describes the relationship between stress, force per area, and strain deformation in a material, including how quickly that deformation occurs. It tells us whether a material behaves like a solid, a fluid, or something in between, and how its mechanical properties change under different conditions, such as temperature, pressure, and strain rate. In geology, rheology refers to how rocks deform under stress inside the earth. Rocks are not always perfectly rigid. Their mechanical behavior depends strongly on environmental conditions at low temperatures and pressures such as near the surface. Rocks tend to behave brittlely, meaning they fracture and form faults. At higher temperatures and pressures such as deeper in the crust or mantle, rocks behave ductilely. if I pronounce it correctly, ductility, meaning they slowly flow or creep without breaking. This ductile flow occurs because heat weakens the crystal lattice and reduces the rock's viscosity, allowing it to deform over time, over time, even though it is still a pure solid. A simple way to describe rheology mathematically is through the relationship between stress, which in this equation is using sigma. I know sigma in a different equation. In my last video, I talked about the sigma being Stephan-Boltzmann's law. That's when we're talking about the equation and releasing heat into the atmosphere. And in this equation, sigma stands for the stress and strain rate, which is epsilon dot. What they call epsilon dot. It's like an epsilon with a dot above it. For many geological materials, this relationship is written as epsilon dot equals A times sigma to the power of eta times e to the negative e over r times t, where e or epsilon dot is strain rate, sigma is applied stress, A is a material constant, N is the stress exponent, uh, uh, no, A or yeah, it's eta. Eta is the stress exponent. It looks like an N right there, but it's actually supposed to be an eta. E is activation energy, R is the gas constant, and T is temperature. This equation shows that higher temperatures greatly increases the formation rate, which is why hot rocks flow much more easily than cold rocks. This is important for geophysics because rheology determines how heat and material move inside the Earth. When rocks heat up, their viscosity decreases and the rheology changes from rigid to ductile. That change allows convection, delamination, and advection to occur, meaning heated rock can begin to move and transport heat far more efficiently than by conduction alone. AB's upper crust argument implicitly assumes a very specific rheological model of the crust, even if it is not stated explicitly. His reasoning treats the upper crust as if it were a rigid, intact, low probability block of rock where heat can only escape by conduction through solid stone. In physics terms, that assumption means the system is being modeled as a static conduction dominated medium. Under those conditions, his conclusion that the crust would heat rapidly is unsurprising because conduction through rock is relatively slow. If a large volumetric heat production rate, Q over watts over cube is imposed on a sealed rock volume, then the temperature rise follows the relationship delta T over delta T equals Q over P times Cp, where P is density and Cp is heat capacity. In a conduction-only scenario, heat accumulates locally and temperatures can rise quickly. However, that scenario only applies if the rheology of the crust remains rigid and transport mechanisms remain limited to conduction. The problem is the heating itself changes the rheology of the rock. As temperature increases, rock strength and viscosity decreases dramatically, which makes deformation easier. In geophysics, this behavior is described by temperature-dependent rheology, often approximated by an Arrhenius relationship, such as eta proportionate to e to the e over r times t, meaning viscosity eta drops rapidly as temperature T rises. As viscosity decreases, the crust becomes mechanically weaker and begins to fracture, shear, and flow more easily. That change in rheology opens additional pathways for heat transport that do not exist in perfect rigid crust. Okay. Once deformation begins, the system transitions from conduction-dominated heat transfer to advection and convection, which are far more efficient at moving heat. This transition is captured by the Rayleigh number. Rayleigh equals P times G times alpha, or yeah, G times PG times or rho times G times alpha times delta T times d cubed over kappa times eta. This dimensionless number compares buoyancy forces generated by heating if the resisting effects of viscosity and thermal diffusion. If Rayleigh is small, then heat moves mainly by conduction. If Rayleigh is large, then convection occurs and material starts moving. Because viscosity eta decreases as temperature rises, the Rayleigh number increases rapidly during the heating. That means heating does not simply accumulate energy in place, it pushes the system toward mechanical instability and motion, which transports rocks far more efficiently than conduction alone. This is why the assumption of a static conduction only upper crust is unrealistic under extreme heating conditions. Heating causes several processes to activate simultaneously. Fracturing increases permeability. Fluids begin circulating through newly formed pathways, Um, uh, weakening rock may be delaminate or sink. Magma can intrude upward, and large-scale deformation can transport hot material away from the region where heat is produced. In other words, the crust does not behave like a sealed container accumulating heat. It behaves like a dynamically evolving system whose rheology changes as it heats. The consequence of this physics is that the hottest material becomes the most mobile material. Regions experiencing the strongest heating weaken first, allowing them to deform, flow, or advance downward into deeper layers where heat can be redistributed. Cooler and mechanically stronger regions remain in place. This produces a natural sorting effect. The crust that remains near the surface is not necessarily the crust that experienced the highest temperatures. Therefore, the presence of radioactive minerals throughout the crust does not imply that every portion of the crust must each melting temperature simultaneously. The the temperature history depends on the balance between heat generated and dynamically evolving heat transport pathways, not simply on the amount of radioactive material present. All right, just to kind of clarify this, essentially, in order for AB to claim that the non-advected crust was hot enough, he's essentially claiming that the non-advected crust was hot enough to melt the crust and destroy the fission tracks and polonium halos, and at the same time be non-advected crust, which is a contradiction in terms. If it's non-advected, then it would not be hot enough to melt the crust or destroy fission tracks or polonium halos, because that heat would have already been moved. If it was hot enough to do, if it was hot enough to do all those things, then it would have been advected, not non-advected. If it's a non-advected crust, then that means it did not do that. Essentially, AB is violating the branch of physics known as rheology. AB's objections can be summarized as 1. There are rocks in today's crust with enough uranium, thorium, potassium to generate melt level heat if and is compressed into the flood year. 2. We know that decay occurred in those rocks because they contain fission tracks halos, and therefore 3. That those same rocks must have been kept cool elsewhere and continuously, or else tracks halos would be erased. And 4. Some of our basement granite, so at least some were never recycled. The key error is that this argument assumes a largely static, conduction-only thermal regime for the non-advected crust and then treats the presence of radiation damage features as proof that nothing mechanically or hydrothermally charged. But once temperature dependent rheology is included, and it must be, that static slab assumption collapses. Rheology is precisely the branch of physics that governs how rock deforms and flows under stress, and it is highly temperature dependent. A standard creep law used in geodynamics is epsilon dot equals A times sigma to the power of eta times e to the negative e over r times t, where epsilon to the epsilon dot is strain rate, a and eta are material constants, Sigma is stress. E is activation energy. R is the gas constant, and T is temperature. This equation shows that strain rate increases exponentially with temperature for the same stress, meaning heated rock is not mechanically quote unquote stuck. It becomes weak and deforms much more readily. Equivalently, viscosity drops rapidly as temperature rises, often summarized as eta, proportionate to E over RT. This is why it is physically expected that the hottest crustal regions are the first to localize strain into shear zones, damage zones, detachments, and fault systems. In other words, heating does not merely uh, sit there producing thermal runaway. It changes the mechanical state of the crust and opens transport pathways that strongly increase heat export, treating the upper crust as an intact block with modern background. Permeability is the hidden assumption driven in the it must melt conclusion. You can see how strong this temperature effect is with a simple Arrhenius viscosity ratio using a representative activation energy eta 2 over eta 1 equals e to the e over r times 1 over t2 subtract 1 over t1 equals e to 300,000, I want to say, over 8.314 times 1 over 1500 minus 1 over 1400 equals e to the negative 1.72 equals 0.179, meaning viscosity drops by 1 over 0.179 equals 5.6 times for only a plus 100K increase. For eta 2 over 81 equals 0.0399 changes yield even larger, meaning, okay, 0.0399, meaning viscosity drops by 25.1 times. At cooler crustal temperatures, e.g., 1200K, the same plus 100K and plus 200K changes yield even larger drops, roughly 10 times and 70 times. This is not a hand wave. It is precisely why heated crust becomes dynamically unstable and why the hottest material is preferentially mobilized first. That directly undermines the assumption that the highest heated parts of the crust necessarily remain stationary long enough to cook their quote unquote cook their own tracks away. This is also captured by the Rayleigh number criterion for when a heated layer transitions from conduction dominating heat transfer to convection and advection dominated transport. Rayleigh equals rho times g times alpha times delta t times d cube over kappa times eta. If Rayleigh is small, then heat moves mainly by conduction. If Rayleigh is large, then convection occurs and materials start moving. Note the dependence are Rayleigh proportionate to delta T over eta. Heating raises delta T while rheology makes eta collapse. Therefore, Rayleigh increases rapidly as heating increases. Once that threshold is exceeded, the relevant physics is no longer static crust warming in place, but a mechanically evolving crust and mantle where motion becomes the dominant transport mechanism. This is exactly This is exactly the kind of regime change my model is invoking during the catastrophic boundary conditions, and it is why AB's static slab inference is not a valid therefore. Now, to the specific claim about polonium halos and fission tracks being destroyed, AB is treating these as if they require the entire host rock volume to have remained cold everywhere during accelerated nuclear decay, and as any high heating anywhere would uniformly erase them, That's not how physics works. Both fission tracks annealing and helium preservation are time dependent, time temperature dependent, and strongly sensitive to local thermal histories. Fission tracks form mainly from uranium-238, spontaneous fission in minerals like zircon and apatite. Their erasure is not an on-off switch at a single temperature. It is kinetic. The question is, did the relevant minerals spend enough time at high temperatures to annul tracks? A brief transient excursion is not equivalent to sustained annulling. Likewise, polonium halos record alpha damage events and can persist unless the host minerals recrystallize or is heated sufficiently along to reset the damaged structure. Therefore, the existence of tracks, halos, constrains thermal histories, but it does not prove no catastrophic deformation or no heat export. It only rules out the specific thermal histories that will reset them. AB is jumping from track exists to therefore the rock must have stayed cool by conduction alone, which is a non sequitur. The deeper point is that AB's argument implicitly assumes spatially uniform heating and uniform thermal isolation, but my model is inherently non-uniform and dynamically self-sorting. The hottest regions weaken first, rheology, become the more deformable and are the first to be transported. The crust that remains is preferably the cooler, stronger portion and can preserve its tracks and halos. Even if some basement granite remain in place, that still does not force melt level temperatures because remaining in place does not imply no heat export. The correct governing question is bulk. Does total heat export exceeds total heat production in the relevant volume over the relevant time profile? As we've proven in the last video, advection does outpace the heat production. AB keeps treating it as a single path requirement. If it didn't advect into the mantle, it must melt, but that is not forced by the physics itself. Finally, we know the decay happened in those rocks is true in the minimal sense that these rocks contain damaged features consistent with radioactive processes, but it does not prove the particular thermal and mechanical boundary conditions AB is assuming. To turn his claim into a true refutation, he would need to do the full couple calculation at rock scale, specify the volumetric heat production rate Q over or Q times W over M cube. He is asserting for these rock bodies during the flood years, specify the time profile, peak versus constant, then solve the transient heat equation with realistic boundary conditions, including involving rheology and transport, fracture permeability, fluid advection, eventing, latent heat transport. Without that, it would melt is an argument from an assumed static regime, not a demonstrated conclusion. Once rheology is included, the system is not static trap. Heating pushes the crust into deformation, increases mobility and transport, and provincially removes the hottest material first, exactly the behavior that preserves tracks and halos in the crust that remains. And of course, in our last video, we actually showed how the heat is actually outpaced by the speed of convection and advection. Thus, it's fast enough to get rid of the heat before the rock is actually melted. We've actually done the math on this. Has AB done the math on this? No. Has any other critic had done the math on this? No. So this argument that it would melt is just it's there's no evidence at all to back up that claim. We showed that that was not the case. Furthermore, this argument is self-refuting, even if it had worked with the physics, and it did not. It's shining a great big spotlight right on the fact that this is evidence for accelerated nuclear decay and no intense heat generation. At best, it would disprove my mechanism if it worked at all, all the while shining a great big spotlight on the fact that we have evidence for accelerated decay, but no heat issue. And of course, it didn't work, but even if it did, it wouldn't matter. It would shine a big spotlight on the fact that there's still evidence that the mechanism existed. and the accelerated decay happened. The only logical inference from that, as drawn by Dr. Andrew Snelling and the rest of the rate members, is that there must have been a mechanism to get rid of the heat, since we know, or a mechanism fast enough. It's probably what I should have put, a mechanism fast enough, because they do argue that, to get rid of the heat, since we know, one, exonucleic decay happened, and two, no heat problem, meaning no, the heat must have not have been there lingering there long enough to actually destroy the fission tracks and polonium halos. Not knowing what that mechanism is doesn't change this, even if this argument was valid. Talking about AB's argument, and it's not. And it's not. Lastly, none of these guys have quantified anything. Uh, they tried to tell me I haven't quantified everything, but it's them that have not quantified anything. This would melt the crust is a slogan, not a calculation. Have they calculated how AN occurred in the upper mantle? Not for the whole year, but for every second due to the speed of convection in the mantle and advection in the crust. They would need to calculate per second to make sure the advection doesn't outpace it. Have they calculated this against the speed of advection while factoring rheology? No, they haven't. Have they considered how much heat is produced in a single region of the upper crust and measure that against the temperature that would take those tracks and halos to annul? Despite accusing me of this, they have not calculated any of this. Until they do, the crust would melt is a baseless assertion. All right. Um, a strong version. Okay. AB also introduced another argument at the micro level, where he tried to argue for conduction only at the micro level. Okay, a strong version of his micro scale objection is that zircon crystals are not ordinary host rocks, grains, but uranium-rich inclusions embedded throughout the granite. So, under accelerated nuclear decay, they would become intense internal heat sources, even if zircons are only tens to hundreds of microns in size. The objection is that the relevant problem is not merely whether he can leave the crystal boundary, but whether continuous volumetric heat generation inside the zircon and the surrounding granite can be removed fast enough by conduction. Granite has relatively low thermal diffusivity and conductivity, and zircons are abundant enough that their local thermal fields may overlap. On this view, a simple diffusion timescale estimate such as T approximately L square over alpha does not settle the issue, because that formula says how quickly a temperature perturbation can spread over a distance L, not whether the host medium can keep up. If I'm not mistaken, I believe this is how the argument is being framed by AV, can keep up with a sustained internal power source. The argument therefore claims that once billions or hundreds of millions of years of decay are compressed into a short interval, zircon interiors and immediately surrounding granite will rise to annealing or melting temperatures before the heat could be exported away. And because the same rocks preserve fission tracks and polonium halos, today such accelerated decay would predict the destruction of the very features used to infer that decay occurred in those rocks. All right, my response to this: that objection only works if zircon grains can sustain a large temperature excess above the host rock, but the governing microscale physics says they cannot. The transient diffusion timescale across zircon size length scale is T approximate L square over alpha. For a typical zircon radius, L approximate 1 times 10 per to the fourth power meters, and granite thermal diffusivity, I'm talking too fast, diffusivity, alpha approximately 1 times 10 per to the sixth power meter square per second. This gives T approximately 1 times 10 per to the fourth power square over 1 times 10 to the sixth power equals 1 times 10 per square per second. Equals 0.01 seconds. Actually, check this out. This is actually in accordance with the math also that Dr. Andrew Snelling came up with as well. That time scale does not by itself compute temperature, but it does show that any zircon host temperature difference is relaxed in hundredths of a second, not minutes or hours, to test whether continuous internal rate of heating could nevertheless maintain a substantial excess temperature. The correct estimate is the internal heating sphere relation delta T, approximately Q R squared over 6K, where Q is volumetric heat production, R is zircon radius, and K is thermal conductivity. Using P zircon as approximately 4 6 or 4,650 times 10 to the eighth power. Is that right? No. Approximately 4,650 kilograms over meters cube. Uranium concentration equals 1,000 ppm equals 0.001 by mass, and present day uranium specified power uh, uh, approximately 1 times 10 per to the fourth power watts per kilogram. The present zircon volumetric heat production is Q present approximately 4,650 times 0.001 times 1 times 10 per to the fourth power equals 4.65 times 10 to the fourth power watts per meter cube. If that is accelerated by 5 times 10 to the eighth power, 500 million years compressed into 1 year, then Q accelerated nuclear K is approximately 2.325 or 325 times 10 to the fifth power watts per meter cube, with R equals 1 times 10 to the fourth power or per to the fourth power meter, and K equals 3 watts over M times K. Uh, I think it's watts per meters times K. The zircon temperature excess is delta T, approximately 2.325 times 10 to the fifth power times 1 times 10 per to the fourth power squared over 6 times 3 equals 1.29 times 10 per to the fourth power Kelvin. Even an extreme 4 times 10 to the ninth power acceleration gives only delta T approximately 1.03 times 10 per to the per cube Kelvin, and pushing further to 5,000 ppm uranium, and R equals 2 times 10 per to the fourth power meter yields only delta T is approximately 2.06 times 10 per to the square Kelvin. Those are tiny temperature differences. So the branch of physics that actually governs this problem, transient conduction plus temperature dependent rheology, does not support independent zircon thermal runaway. The zircon remains essentially in thermal equilibrium with the host rock, which means the real question is not grain size melting, but bulk heat, rock heat, energy balance of the surrounding crustal volume. In other words, fission tracks and polonium halos in non-melted crust are not threatened by zircon scale self-heating because the microscaled conduction argument fails quantitatively once the correct equations are used. Okay, and I've also double checked the math on this, and I've got the numbers here. So the numerical conclusion remains the same for zircon-sized grains. The self-heating above the host rock is tiny. All right, the microscale conduction math has been checked, and the result is robust. For zircon-sized grains, self-heating above the host rock is negligible. The exact volumes depend somewhat on assumed conductivity, diffusivity, grain size, and uranium concentration, but the conclusion does not change because the temperature excess scales with R squared, and zircon grains are extremely small. Now, we're going to deal with some arguments that AB had made as well in my response, in my exchange with AB. AB said there is no temperature component to that equation. There's nothing about a thermal gradient between zircon and bulk granite. There is nothing about what temperatures was achieved by either medium, so how can it possibly establish when thermal equilibrium is achieved? Here's my response. The criticism misunderstands what the diffusion timescale equation T approximately L square over alpha actually represents. That relation does not calculate temperature. It calculates the characteristic time required for any temperature gradient to decay by thermal diffusion, which is why a temperature term does not appear explicitly in the formula. The equation is derived from the transient heat equation dt over dt. This is dt, not delta t. There's a difference there. It equals alpha delta t what is delta? Yeah, delta square t, or is that t? I don't know how you say that, but alpha delta looks like delta square t, and its purpose is to determine how rapidly two regions approach thermal equilibrium, not what the equilibrium temperatures will be. For a zircon grain will with L approximate 1 times 10 per to the fourth power meter embedded in granite with alpha approximately 1 times 10 per to the 6th power meter square per second. The equilibration time is t approximately 0.01 second, as already mentioned, meaning any temperature differences between the zircon and the host rock dissipates almost immediately. The relevant follow-up question is whether the internal radioactive heating could sustain a persistent temperature difference, which is determined by the relation delta T as approximately QR square over 6K for a heated sphere. When realistic zircon dimensions and heat production rates are used, the resulting temperature excess is extremely small, typically 10 per to the fourth power. Subtract 10 per to the square Kelvin, showing that zircon grains remains essentially in thermal equilibrium with the surrounding granite. The diffusion equation therefore doesn't exactly what it's supposed to do. It demonstrates that heat cannot remain trapped inside the microscopic zircon crystals long enough to produce thermal runaway. Okay, AB's response: this equation can only tell how far heat can transfer. This criticism misunderstands what the diffusion timescale T approximately L square over alpha represents. The relation is derived from the transient heat equation dt over dt equals alpha delta delta square T, and it does not calculate the amount of heat transferred. It calculates the characteristic time required for a temperature difference across a distance L to dissipate by thermal diffusion. Because the equation describes how quickly a temperature perturbation decays, the magnitude of the temperature difference does not appear explicitly in the expression. For a zircon grain with L approximately 1 times 10 per to the fourth power meter, embedded in granite with alpha approximately 1 times 10 per to 6 power meters square per second. The equilibration time is t approximately 0.01 seconds, meaning any temperature difference between the zircon and the host rock disappears almost immediately. AB's statement that the equation approach only tells us how far heat can transfer is therefore incorrect. It tells us how quickly thermal equilibrium is approached. The question of whether internal radioactive heating could sustain a temperature difference is addressed by the internally heated sphere relation delta T approximately Q R square over 6K. When realistic zircon sizes and heat production rates are used, the resulting temperature excess is extremely small, typically 10 per to the fourth power, subtract 10 per square Kelvin, showing that zircon grains remain essentially in thermal equilibrium with the surrounding granite. The limiting factor is the microscopic grain size. Because the temperature excess scales with R squared, conduction into the host rock removes heat far faster than it can accumulate inside the crystal. Okay, his next argument, at the end of the day, you're stuck at the same spot Baumgartner has been for 40 years. He looked into hydrothermal cooling too. I don't, AB developed this idea that he thought that I was using hydrothermal cooling as a mechanism. I wasn't actually. He kept saying, "How do I keep it cool?" And it's like, well, my model has lots of different pathways. And then I said, well, and I just suggested the hydrothermal thing as a possible aid, but I didn't really suggest that as my actual mechanism because advection was my mechanism across. But I didn't quite understand what he was getting at the time. As far as Baumgartner looking into hydrothermal cooling, I do not know. But this is going to come up a lot because of this misunderstanding about that concept. They thought that I was trying to use that as a mechanism. I wasn't. It's not found in any of my videos because I don't have that as a mechanism. That is not my mechanism for cooling off the crust. I never said it was. But they misunderstood that and went with it for several arguments. So we'll cover that a little bit. I don't know about what Baumgartner looked into as far as hydrothermal cooling. That's new to me. I've never heard of it. And still told you that you had a conduction problem in the crust in your original concept, and you've done nothing to fix it. Oh God, when he first said that, I laughed because I don't know what to do on that. Because the fact is that Baumgartner has never actually heard my GTF model. What I said in my original video, depth of the heat problem, was when I presented my HAD model, which never made it to the public eye. Never. I had abandoned that model long before I ever produced my first heat problem model or heat problem video. My first heat problem video was on my GTF model. So the HAD model had no advection. It had no. In fact, I didn't even look at the speed of convection at that time. In fact, Baumgartner's quote, which I quoted in my original video, is the very reason I abandoned my model, my HAD model, and started looking into the speed of convection as well. Also started looking into, well, I was already looking at positive feedback loop for accelerating nuclear decay, and then that's what prompted me to look at the positive feedback loop in reference to uh, the speed of convection, and that led me, well, into the system it became. But I had abandoned my entire model over that one quote, and I began to research something that I had not researched at that time. So it was a major deal. And I respect Dr. Baumgartner very much. I took his quote to heart, so I don't appreciate Amy misrepresenting me here or Baumgartner. Baumgartner was essentially telling me about how conduction, and I've actually come on record publicly in my very first heat problem video on the depth of heat problem, and I said I 100% agree with Dr. John Baumgartner. Okay, so I've actually said that. All right, outright. My model, in addition to that, it actually misrepresents my model because my model actually bypasses conduction entirely, or not entirely, but it bypasses it. Conduction is still going on, but it bypasses it enough where it's able to get around the conduction issue. So it doesn't go through conduction, in other words. It uses other processes. Advection is mass flow rather than heat flow. It's not diffusion like conduction is. Um, all right, my response to AB, this is false. The original email that I sent to Dr. John Baumgartner and that I had referenced in the depth of the heat problem video was over my heat absorption and distribution HAD model, which never made it to public viewing, not my GTF model. Dr. Baumgartner has never heard about my GTF model to come comment on it. The HAD model was my first model I had invented, which was not thermally driven, was not based on a positive feedback loop systems, nor had anything in it about convection and advection speeds, nor bypassing conduction. In that video, I had also said I was 100% in agreement with Baumgartner on that. At that time, I hadn't even researched convection, advection, or conduction, and my HAD model had never said public, had never seen public FaceTime. My first video on the heat problem was the depth of the heat problem, which introduced my GTF model. Haven't done, and he said that I haven't done nothing to fix it or bypass his concerns. I had completely abandoned my model over it. So I don't know that is such a misrepresentation. That is such an understatement of what I actually did, because that very quote is what led me to abandon my entire model. Eventually, it's of course, it was after me coming up with 6 versions of it, but I did end up abandoning it. And that model never once saw it to public face. The only model that I've ever presented publicly was the GTF model. That was it. I have not presented the HAD model publicly other than to mention that that was my original model. I think the only other person I had talked about the HAD model with, besides Dr. John Baumgartner, was I did talk a little bit about it with Dr. Andrew Snelling before, and I talked about it with Donnie Badinsky from Standing for Truth, but that's it. And my model never really saw public. It went public at all. Um, uh, uh, that was my heat absorption and distribution, or HAD model, not my GTF model. Dr. Baumgartner has never heard about my GTF model. Comment on it. The HAD model was my first model I had invented that was not thermally driven, not positive feedback system. It had nothing to do with convection, advection, nor bypassing conduction. In that video, I had also 100% said I was in agreement with Baumgartner on that. At that time, I hadn't even researched convection, advection, or conduction, and my HAD model had never seen public FaceTime. My first video on the heat problem was the depth of the heat problem, which introduced my HAD model. Haven't done anything to fix it. I have. I abandoned my entire model over it. It was launched me. It's what was launched me in the direction I now end up at. So seriously, Dr. Baumgartner has never heard my GTL model to comment on it thus far. Recently, I told Dr. Snelling about my GTL model. I did do recently told him about my GTL model, or part of it, the part with the advection. Uh, and he actually commented that he can actually move geologic processes. That was his reply on that. Uh, but just the thermally driven part, and I might have mentioned convection and advection parts, but he agreed that heat can drive these kinds of geological activity. Anyhow, my model bypasses conduction, so Baumgartner's concerns here, which only applies to conduction, doesn't concern my new model. This is AB's accusational straw man or misrepresentation. He argued that every time it's the heat from the crust evacts to the mantle. Well, no, actually, some of it is evacted to the mantle, some of it is hydrothermally transferred to the surface. This is because he mistakenly thought, I don't know why he was really arguing hydrothermal to the surface. I assume that was the mistaken and thinking hydrothermal cooling. Maybe he thought some of it was being transported, but I'm not really sure because I never really argued that. Um, my response, false and misrepresentation. I will discuss this in a little bit, but all of the heat is advected into the upper mantle. I am open to some of the heat in the crust being carried up by the fountains of Great Deep, although they are their own heat source. But my model doesn't argue that nor require that. He assumes that it does due to his own misguided argument discussed at the beginning of this video, but that's the issue under dispute. But no, my model doesn't require a secondary cooling mechanism for the upper crust. Advection is sufficient to get rid of the heated material fast enough. AB is just ignoring a major branch in physics called rheology discussed earlier. Okay, the argument, the again, this is AB's accusation, the hydrothermal network. The premise is granted that bulk mass transfer from the current upper crust to the mantle that didn't occur, i.e., crust was not entirely recycled. Another mechanism is required for heat removal in the upper crust. You've offered one, the hydrothermal network, which I didn't. I suggested it as an aid because kept asking me over and over again what cooled the remaining crust, and I'm like, well, my model does accept multiple pathways, and so I suggested that before I understood fully what he was arguing. Um, but now that I did know, no, evection is good enough to work. It doesn't require another cooling mechanism. This is what should be discussed and quantified in your slideshow. No, it shouldn't. It's not part of the model. So why would I include it? I only included it at one time as a suggestion because I didn't understand what he was actually asking because he kept on trying to force me to answer a question about what cooled on the remaining non-evected crust. It's like, well, if the heat, and that's why I couldn't understand because the heat's removed. Why would I need to cool it down? So I didn't understand what he was really asking here. Um, but he mistook that suggestion as a actual part of the model, which if it's part of the model, it should be quantified. Um, but that's not. But it was never part of the model. That's the thing. My response, false. This is what is called the fallacy of a false premise. The premise admits to assuming something we know would violate physics. We know if mass transfer is going on in the lower crust due to the accelerated speed of convection triggering high speed eviction in the crust, then the same process that works in the lower crust would also work in the upper and even middle crust. The laws of physics would demand it. It is also false that this would require another cooling mechanism since it assumes the insufficiency of advection to remove the heat, and we know it is sufficient to remove the heat fast enough. The hydrothermal network claim is also false. This is not part of the model, and it assumes by its own admission that bulk mass transfer didn't happen. Thus, it is circular premise and therefore false. It is also not part of the GTF model. Therefore, I do not need to quantify it. This assumes the very thing you need to demonstrate and is thus a circular argument. I do not need secondary cooling mechanism in my model. With this added to the initial argument, AB's argument is no longer a reductio ad absurdum argument. A true reductio ad absurdum argument must assume the other person's position for the sake of argument to show that it would lead to an inconsistent conclusion. AB had added a circular premise to that argument, thus assuming the very thing he needs to demonstrate. All right, let's talk about other models on the heat problem. I want to cover a few on that. Before I cover that, I do want to point out some things real quick. Um, I have no problem with any of these guys. In fact, me and Matt are friends, and maybe me and Matt, or me and Donnie are friends, and maybe me and Matt are too. I've only had Matt on a couple times, but I know me and Donnie talk all the time. And I've had Donnie on many times. I've had Matt on twice. I wouldn't mind having them both back. I love them to death, and they've done some great work on standing for truth. They've done awesome. They do awesome interviews. Me and Donnie talk on Facebook all the time. So I appreciate what these guys have done. And I think that they do a wonderful job there. And I really don't really even like talking about other YC models. It's usually not my favorite topic to discuss. Every now and then I have to sit there and talk about it and respond to a YC. It's not something I usually do. I don't like fighting with other YCs over differences in models, and I like encouraging other YCs to build to model build, to build their models, and it's okay to have competing models. It's not gonna destroy the universe if you have a competing model. That is very scientific. You're allowed to have competing models. And that's okay. But there are some people, I have had YCs come on my channel and start trying to fight me over it because I support certain models. They're not theirs. Whether it be my model that I came up with, GTF model, or whether it be someone else's model like Dr. Jason Lau's SC model, or Dr. John Baumgartner's CPT model, YCs that don't like those models will come on here and try to fight me on it. and that sort of thing. And I don't like having to fight with them over a difference in the model because I really don't care what model someone takes. Um, Personally, unless it's a bad, unless it's like a model. Well, say I don't care what model people take. I mean within YC. Obviously, I care when naturalists and older creationists are arguing for the Big Bang model, or evolutionists are arguing for evolution, things like that. But when it comes to YCs, I fear all YCs are getting to the same place eventually. So I'm not really worried too much if how they get there. But unfortunately, the way science progresses is by eliminating competing models. So eventually, you do have to end up talking about them. And I get these people on my channel all the time trying to fight me over this. And so they want some my thoughts on these things. And I've actually talked to Donnie, and Donnie said that him and Matt's okay with me critiquing their models or something on this as well. Because I've asked him if it's all right. Because I didn't want any problems. Because it's no, it's what it is. You know, we got competing models. Doesn't mean we have to compete, but we have competing models. Um, and I'm gonna start with my favorite guy that likes to fight me over everything about my model because he has a competing model. David Winsberg. I just refer to his model as hydrological cooling model. I don't fully understand every part of his model, but it is interesting. It has to do with groundwater and somehow it prolongs the cooling effect of the heat from CPT, catastrophic plate tectonics, runaway subduction, and which he does agree with. And somehow it's supposed to like stretch it over 200 years or something like that. Like I said, I don't know all the specifics. David can fill anybody in on the specifics of his model, but the biggest weakness of David's model is one that other critics themselves have actually picked up on. It's the fact that David's model is not designed to handle mega level heat sources. Now he says originally he said that he didn't agree with stellar nuclear decay, and so that's why he didn't include it as a heat source. Um, I understand where David's coming from. I do, but I also understand that if that YC that accelerated nuclear decay is a mainstream position at this point of YCs. Like the vast majority, like almost all YCs, with exception of a very small handful, don't agree with accelerated or do agree with accelerated nuclear decay. So you got that many YCs, you got the rate project research, and we're not just arbitrarily choosing this. We actually have evidence that we present for accelerated decay. And all that being said means that if David says, well, I just don't include it because I don't agree with it, he has to give his reasons why he don't believe in it. And he has never. There's no online evidence at all of him ever doing that. I did ask him once why he didn't think it was viable. He wouldn't give me an answer to it, so I don't know why he said it. But I do know here recently he admitted that he now accepts accelerated nuclear decay because he just now finished the rate project research. That made me wonder. It's like, what? Okay, so when he rejected it, it was an uninformed decision to reject it because he didn't have all the information. Now that he does, he accepts it as a heat problem, as or not heat problem, but as a heat source during the flood. Now he did go and says that well, it just depends on how much heat is also there. And I agree with him that it depends on how much is accelerated. But David's now left with the choice of either he uses the rate team's heat heat amount of accelerated nuclear decay that they argued for during the rate project, roughly in secular terms 500 million years worth, and that's what I used when I argued for my heat source for accelerated decay. Or he tries to he'll look like if he has to be able to justify the numbers for this because if he just looks at how much his model is able to handle additionally and then says that much accelerated decay occurred during the flood, it's going to look like a rescue device. So he's got to sit there and actually justify the numbers of why he thinks so much accelerated decay occurred during the flood. Um, and the problem with David's model is it's not really designed to deal with a mega level heat source. So I don't honestly know what he did. I do know that I asked him what's he going to do about that. He said he did not know. He has to look into it, find out how much accelerated nuclei occurred during the flood. Um, I don't know whether he will or he isn't. Maybe he will. But another thing is that David mistakenly thought that I was adding hydrological cooling mechanism as a mechanism to the GTF model as cooling up the crust. And so he started arguing like, "Oh, this is not enough to cool off the crust," and I know that for a fact that this is not enough to cool off the crust. And I was like, no, this is not part of my model. I don't have to quantify it because it's not part of my model. um, and um, and then he said that then I told him that the here's the bad part about all that. Uh, I don't have a hydrological cooling model, but he does. Okay, and if he admits that the hydrologic cooling model is not enough to take care of the heat generated from accelerated decay, then how is his model supposed to do that? It's like open mouth, insert foot. So essentially, uh, it, it, so he basically is admitting that his own model cannot handle accelerated nuclear decay. His model cannot handle mega level heat sources like that. It just cannot. It's not designed to. So I don't know what he's going to do to try to make that situation work. It'll be interesting to see him try, but I honestly don't think that he'll be able to do it. Um, all right, Matt Naylor, Proton 21 experiments. Um, okay, Matt Naylor, Proton 21 experiments. Just to be clear, I don't disagree, or I don't disagree necessarily with the Proton 21 experiments. I don't know that much about it. Matt knows more about it than I do. Um, uh, if valid, uh, okay, it'd be interesting. Um, I don't have a problem with the Proton 21 experiments themselves. And by the way, the Proton 21 experiments and accelerated nuclear decay don't actually contradict each other. So someone can actually believe in accelerated nuclear decay and the proton 21 experiments at the same time. They can. Now I don't want to personally die on that hill. Um, so I'm open. I'm open to the proton 21 experiments, but nothing in my argument depends on whether the proton 21 experiments are valid. If they're valid, that's great. That's another black stain on the eyes of radiometric dating methods. So, it's another problem for them, you know, and I'm okay with that. If it's not, we got quite a bit wrong with radiometric dating methods to not even worry about it. So, none of my arguments depend on whether Proton 21 experiments are good and work. I'm not willing to down that hill because I don't need to. I've got lots of reasons to distrust radiometric dating. Um, but I'm okay with proton touring experiments if they are valid. Now here's where the problem gets much more worse, in my opinion, or not worse. Worse, probably not a good word for it. The situation does is goes downhill, in my opinion, and that because the proton 21 experiments isn't the problem. It's when you take the proton 21 experiments and you use it as a substitution for accelerated nuclear decay, which I'm a big promoter of on this channel and have been for some time. And essentially, MAP model does that. Apparently, when the proton 21 experiments were done, not that much heat was generated. The idea is that you could be able to skip over entire decay chains And over because one of the things that creates so much heat is like for example, if you go from uranium 238 all the way down to lead 206, that goes through a decay chain which includes other isotopes, and that generates heat. Now, normally it does it really slow, so the heat's not really massive. Um, but accelerated decay, the heat would have been much stronger, and so the idea is that maybe we can avoid these if the isotopes are the dart isotopes start out with that in there and or convert to other isotopes by skipping over entire decay chains, the entire isotopes, and not producing that much heat. Uh, and that's the idea. Now, the proton 21 experiments, as I understand them, calls for a lot of energy, a lot of energy. Um, and so I actually have another guy that comes on my channel named Steven who tries to debate me on things. And he's a YC, he's a young Earth creationist, but he often takes extreme models, Steven does. Um, and one of the models he takes is Matt's. Um, and he takes Matt's proton 21 experiments and as a substitution for accelerated nuclear decay, and he comes on here and tries to debate me and that sort of thing. He tries to fight me over these models differences. Um, there is when Matt designed the model, his intention was to try to either avoid accelerated nuclear decay because that's why he's using a substitution for accelerated nuclear decay. In fact, Matt actually has been pretty honest with this. He said that the reason he doesn't invoke accelerated nuclear decay is because it gives off too much heat, and he does not see any reason why he should invoke something that issues that much heat. Okay, that's what I heard him say in an interview with Donnie one time. He don't see any reason why he needs to invoke a position like accelerated nuclear decay that's going to give off that much heat. And so he sits there and says, well, maybe there's another way of interpreting that evidence. And that's essentially what he was trying to do. I'll get into that in a second, a little bit more. Um, but Matt um, uh, then used the proton 21 experiments to try to as a substitution for accelerated nuclear decay. And uh, in the process, he wants to avoid using solar decay and be able to interpret the evidence differently. And additionally, he also wants to avoid invoking a miracle. He wants to show a naturalistic way that this could come about without invoking a miracle. Um, there's nothing wrong with invoking a miracle, of course, but it's just the fact that if there's no biblical reason to substantiate why a miracle had occurred, then we probably should be much more worried about invoking one, especially as a rescue device if we have no other reason. Um, all right. And Matt actually called Accelerated Nuclear a rescue device, but that's wrong. Accelerated Nuclear is actually not a rescue device. It's inference from. Originally, it started off as a hypothesis, but it's drawn from inference from certain evidence. I would consider accelerated nuclear a theory at this point, but it's not a rescue device at all. What they're rescuing from, the evidence is on our side. Accelerated nuclear, so um, but so he was trying to trying to keep from invoking a miracle and trying to avoid having to invoke cellular decay. Now here's the thing: proton 21 experiments has to give off a lot of energy. Yes, there's a lot of energy involved, and I actually wrote this in my book when I was sitting there writing my book on this when I was fixing, you know, trying to write a book on my GTF model. I actually mentioned this. And I called it the Proton 21 Catch 22 because in order to if it takes that much energy, the amount of energy necessary to do the magnitude to replace accelerated nuclear would actually rival accelerated nuclear. Now, the only other thing you could do is try to make it during creation week, which of course the model is invoked during creation week. Um, I think um, um, I think maybe Matt might invoke it during day 2 before the atmosphere formed, or well, the atmosphere was created by God around Earth. Um, but you would have to have God when God said let there be light, when God created energy and brought energy into the universe, it would be strong enough to be able to make the proton 21 experiment scenario happen. Yes, that's true. But at that point, you just invoked a miracle, or at least one step away from invoking it, if not. Um, and if you're, because everyone, like 100% of all creationists, doesn't matter whether you're talking about young Earth creationists, or whether you're talking about old Earth creationists, or whether you're talking about theistic evolutionists, 100% of all creationists agree that creation was a miracle. Every single one of us. And if creation was a miracle, then you used energy from that creation to spawn that. And here's the point of the Proton 21 Catch 22, which I think is a catchy title. Proton 21 Catch 22. Is that it renders the entire model useless. The whole point of the model is to substitute cellular decay and avoid a miracle, except you don't do either of these two. You either don't avoid cellular decay or you can't avoid a miracle. If you can't, now, someone like Steven might say, okay, we can say a miracle generated enough energy to make the proton twin experiments happen. But if you're going to say that, why not just go ahead and say, well, God started everything with a certain amount of ratio of isotopes, which I think he did too, anyhow. But I'm just saying that ultimately you're saying that anyhow. You're just trying to come up with a naturalistic explanation to basically say the same thing that we're saying at a divine level. So, what's the point of even invoking proton tunneling experiments in the first place? Because it renders it useless. Now, Matt does try to do something that David did. And I forgot to mention this. Another thing, I said mentioned that David still has to do um, um, uh, where he actually justifies why he doesn't take cellular decay. In addition to that, he would actually have to come up with alternative explanations for the evidence that we present for cellular decay, if he wants to deny it. Matt, however, is different here because he actually does try to interpret the evidence for cellular decay in light of his proton 21 experiments, or at least some of it. Now, I do understand that some of the evidence could be interpreted in light of that. Like, for example, discordant dates. Anything that says radiometric dating is wrong is going to show inconsistent dates. That's fine. That's fine. I think that it's probably more explainable with accelerated decay, but I guess you could explain it with proton twenty experiment situation as well. Um, uh, Now, some of that would be easy to explain in both sides, but there are some evidence that are used for accelerated decay that's exclusively accelerated decay. One of the biggest, is helium retention inside zircon crystals. Um, that is big. It doesn't just prove that the universe is billions, or that the crystals are not billions of years old, because the presence of helium retention inside them, but it also proves that accelerated decay must have occurred in the past because helium is a byproduct of accelerated decay, and there's actually and Dr. Russell Humphreys actually predicted the amount of helium that would be inside zircon crystals if they were 6,000 years old. Uh, and so, if the proton 21 experiments were true, my expectation would be that it would be much more random. It could land on the 6,000 year time, but I doubt it. It probably could have landed 4,000, could have landed 2,000. Why would it land where there's 6,000 years worth of helium inside zircon crystals? So I just don't find that a compelling argument as a result. I have nothing against Proton 21 experiments. I think it's okay. I think it's awesome if you want to take that position. That's fine. I have no problem with someone who says, well, I'm going to take the Proton 21 experiments and the accelerated decay. I'm fine with that too. Um, but to substitute it as accelerated decay, that's where I would have the issue. Um, Okay, what about Donnie Budinsky? Donnie Budinsky has what's called the Genesis Core flood model, and out of all the alternative explanations, obviously I like mine the best, but all the alternative explanations, I like Donnie's the best in terms of alternative ones that I've heard. Um, Now, when I first started researching this and looking into trying to figure out um, what's going on with the so-called heat problem and figuring out how this is resolved within the flood scenario. Um, One of the things that I did not like when I was listening to, because I first when I first started this, I thought I would just, it'd be just like the distant starlight. I'll find one that I like, agree with. It's defensible. It makes sense. It's grounded in strong science, like in the case of Dr. Jason Lau's ASC, and then I would go with that. But I didn't like a lot of the heat problem uh, video models that were being made and the arguments that were being made. Of course, Donnie is not included in that, Donnie's model, because Donnie's model didn't exist at that time, at least not publicly. I'm not including Donnie's model now. I'm including everybody else's model here, including Matt's, because a lot of these models were abandoning major popular level, mainstream, um, well defensible, well argued, stood the test of time, has strong evidence behind it, models, and I was seeing people banning it from CPT for the hydroplate model, abandoning accelerated nuclear decay, and I'm like, why are these people abandoning these models, trying to do that? Or they'll limit the heat problem resolution to only one heat source. Usually it was the CPT, the catastrophic plate tectonics model, that they would limit the heat source to. And so they're not designed to actually handle all the heat that was generated during the flood. So I was very unsatisfied with a lot of these models. Now, like my model, Donnie's model is able to handle mega level heat sources. I think the one of the things that I like the most about Donnie's model is that, like my model, he uses a form of advection. He uses um, he uses like plates, tectonic plates, subduction plates, moving the heat downward toward the core. Um, um, and That's a form of advection. It's not the form I'm using. Some people have mistakenly thought I was using that form, but I wasn't. I wasn't using that form of advection. Um, but he is using a form of advection, and the reason why I liked it so much is because it started making me think that there's a trend, and I started this trend. I was the first to do it because I was the first to actually suggest advection. Nobody else has suggested it before, and I was also I wasn't the first person to suggest that the real problem is getting heat out fast enough. But in terms of the heat problem, resolving it, resolving it, I was the first one to really promote that. I guess a better way of saying that is I'm not the first person to promote that exactly. I'm just the person that got the conversation restructured back to that. Because originally, because a lot of these critics are getting their heat problem thing from other YCs, except YCs don't mean exactly what the critics did. But whenever, like Dr. Andrew Snelling, Dr. John Baumgartner, they talk about a heat problem, and but they are uh, uh, admitting that they believe that there was a mechanism that was fast enough, and they give the reasons why, and they are strong enough to remove this heat quick enough, and they pointed out the fact that the issue is how much heat is being or how fast the heat is being removed, and the heat has to be removed fast enough, and uh, but a lot of critics try to make it sound like it's just about how much heat is being generated rather than how fast the heat is being removed, or how much heat is like it's about how much heat is. Like there's too much heat. No, the problem isn't the amount of heat, it's as how fast the amount of heat is there. We have to get out the heat quick enough, because before it lingers and melts the crust and that sort of thing. You have to get it out fast enough, and that's the idea. And I was first to think of using advection. I don't think nobody else has thought of that before. And Donnie went behind me and actually did his own form of advection, which, like I said, I've started a trend. I've never been much of a trendsetter, so I did kind of like the fact that that Donnie kind of followed after that theme and did something similar. Um, Now, with that said, um, why would I accept my model over Donnie's then, if I like Donnie's model? Um, the reason is because there's a lot of uncertainty that I'm not really sure on Donnie's model. Um, that one of the selling points of my model is that we are working off of what we know, and I could sit there and argue that we know what would happen if you heat the mantle up. We know what would happen if the heat flow is flowing at this rate. We know what would happen in the crust when this happens. We know what would happen. We know they would evect into the upper mantle. We know all this stuff would go on, and so we already have the physics. We know what was going to happen in those cases. But there seemed to be too much uncertainty with Donnie's model. Like, for example, I know that my research, very surface level, says that the subduction plates are not a very efficient heat transfer mechanism. Donnie doesn't really give us the numbers of how much heat absorbed into the mantle, how much heat absorbs into the core. He says a little bit vented upward. He does not give us the transport mechanism upward. I assume it's conduction and volcanism, but he doesn't really specify. He just says it vents upward. He doesn't tell us how much heat vents upward. He says some of it goes into forming things like coal, oil, things like that during the flood. I haven't not actually studied things that did about formation. I think he's basing it on laboratory experiments, if I understood his arguments correctly. Um, uh, but he doesn't really say how much heat was formed on that. He says that the we don't know what the uh, core the core temperature was during the flood. He talks about the core temperature today. He says we don't really know how much. We don't really exactly know how cool it is today. This would mean that this is kind of a non-falsifiable hypothesis that you can't really falsify it, namely that the core was cooler during the flood. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. We don't know. Uh, and so there seems to be a lot of uncertainty. What would happen, and I'm not saying anything bad would happen, but we know what would happen because I haven't actually looked it up actually. I thought about looking it up before, but I haven't looked it up yet. But what would happen, because we know that the mantle convection speed speeds up when it's heated up, and we know what would happen there. But what would happen with subduction plates carrying the heat to the core when you got heat flowing in the mantle at 3.5 billion times faster than modern rates. What would happen to that heat? Would it absorb quickly into the upper mantle? Would it ever even make it to the core? And then there's conduction at the core. Would this still have to go on? Heat conducts. Normally, heat conducts from the core to the mantle, but if the core was cooler than the mantle, then the heat would conduct in reverse. And so the question, because the plates don't normally just dump heat into the core, so it would have to conduct in the core, I would assume. Has Donnie calculated this? Also, the heat sources. What were the heat sources? I asked Donnie one time in Facebook message for the heat for the accelerated nuclear decay, and he said that he has those numbers, but he was in a live video at the time. I haven't asked him since, so it's no fault of Donnie's on that. I could have asked him since then, but I haven't got. But I wonder if he included all the heat sources. I think he talks about in his model water lubricating the plates, which may suggest something similar to a hydroplate model. whereas I take the CPT. But I think that Donnie told me one time he takes a hybrid between the CPT and the hydroplate model. I don't know. I don't fully understand his personal model on that. But if I remember correctly from videos he's done on his heat problem model, it does sound like he thinks the plates were lubricated, which is obviously foreign to the CPT because CPT doesn't argue that. So therefore, I would at least assume that the heat from CPT is not being factored in. Um, but I do think the accelerated decay might be, but I don't know how much heat he's generated from accelerated decay. So there just seems to be a lot of unknowables with Donnie's model. I don't know about this. I don't know about that. And it's just it's not that it's not good. It is a good model. It's a good model. It's plausible. It's probable. Not as plausible probable as mine, I don't think. But but I do think it is. It's got some plausibility to it. Uh, so I think it's a good model. But I do think that it's kind of underdeveloped in certain areas. I think critics would attack it um, easily on a lot of things. I'm not saying that they would win. I'm just saying that they would probably attack Donnie's model in in places where he's not got it developed as much. They may pounce on that. I think is what I mean. If I was Donnie, I would try to develop it a little bit more, maybe strengthen the evidential part of it. As far as I know, he doesn't present any evidence exactly for the model itself. I would like to see him present more evidence in favor of the model. That would be interesting to do as well, and that sort of thing. So I think it's a pretty decent model. I like the fact that he's borrowing some concepts from me. I like that. He adds the word throughput in there, the term throughput. There's a lot of stuff to like about Donnie's model, but I would like to see him develop it more than he has and give us some more specifics, maybe do some more videos on it. Um, but there seems to be too much uncertainty with it. Like the whole model is just designed to be a response to critics, but not really designed to uh, be super defensible in that sense. The way I designed my model, I wanted my model to not have any hypotheticals in it. I want it to be based on what we know from modern day physics and from the evidence. I can prove it with modern day examples even, and be able to use that because often we talk about scaling things to the flood. Obviously, my model is scaled to the intensity of the catastrophic global flood. Um, but this way, I'm also able to use modern examples as well to show that how this would work. And so I can do that and develop my model. I've also made predictions for my model, like 5 predictions now so far. I'll probably just end at 5, but I made 5 successful predictions that come true. Um, I don't know if Donnie's made any predictions with his, but it may be interesting to see um, Donnie develop this a little bit more than he has. All right, divine intervention, miracles. Like I said, I have no problem with someone invoking miracles. Dr. John Baumgartner, Mike Ord have said they thought that this was a miracle. I think Sam from Redefined Living also takes this position as a miracle. I do not think it was a miracle simply because I do think that the physics does justify it. It just we got to be careful not to use a miracle as a rescue device when we're not sure of how else it could be done naturalistically. There's no biblical reason for taking it that it's a miracle. There's no evidence that God had dealt with the heat or was responsible for dealing with the heat or whatnot. There's nothing that shows that. So, and by the way, I have great respect for Dr. John Baumgartner. I have great respect for Mike Ward. I've had both of them on my channel again. I would love to have them both on my channel some more. These are great men of God. I love them to death. Um, but obviously, I don't take the position that it was a miracle. I had no problem with the miracle. I'm open to the idea of it being a miracle. I just don't see any reason to conclude that. and it on top of that comes out sounding like a rescue device. Well, you only including it's a miracle because you can't think of any naturalistic reason to get rid of the heat, and that sort of thing. And so it comes out sounding like a rescue device as a result. And so I don't take the miracle claim. Now, I reject the idea by critics like Erica, who thinks that if you invoke a miracle, you can't do science. You can still do science and still invoke a miracle. Creation itself is a miracle, and I don't think that you could even do science apart from a Christian biblical world. If the Christian biblical worldview wasn't true, um, I think that that doesn't mean atheists can't do science. They can do science. They just would have to borrow from the Christian biblical worldview because theirs can't justify things like uniformity of nature, logic, things like that. Um, so I have no problem with it being someone doing science at the same time invoking miracle. All the original scientists, or most of them, were Christians, and they didn't see a problem in it at all. So absolutely. By the way, the concept of assuming that you have to exclude God from the equation at all times, that God can't do anything at all in nature, and that sort of thing, and from science. And they also do it with history as well. Critics do. This is called metaphysical naturalism, and I reject metaphysical naturalism. Another divine intervention, God acting through the laws of nature. Dr. Russell Humphreys, he's arguing for a fifth dimension, windows of heaven, and of course his rate position was a little bit more plausible, where the universe expands outward and it makes heat go away. That's true if God accelerated it during the flood, but there's no evidence for it. That argument is interesting. It never could gain traction. Later on, Dr. Russell Humphreys changed his view to the windows of heaven in a wooden literal sense, which no YC actually took. But he believes it went to some kind of fifth dimension, which he thinks all of the heat on the Earth just kind of went through there. But I don't think that would account for how you get the heat out of the crust itself, because that would assume it's still going through conduction. How does it get pulled out of the heat up there and this vacuum that goes to the fifth dimension? So I don't take this position. I find it to be extremely implausible. No evidence for it, and so I don't take this position. Um, Someone might fall somewhere in between, like Dr. Andrew Snelling, Polonium Halos, Vision Tracks. I do take Dr. Andrew Snelling's position, but I just invoke the mechanism of the GTF model. But Dr. Andrew Snelling's position already mentioned earlier, polonium halos, the existence of polonium halos, radio halos, polonium radio halos, and fission tracks is evidence of accelerating decay, but they null at high temperatures. Thus, this means that there must be no heat. Either there's no heat generated, or the heat that is generated is being removed by a mechanism fast enough to get rid of the heat. In this case, we now know that to be advection. All right, here's some more criticisms that I've heard. It violates the laws of physics. This is something that I've heard quite a bit since coming up with my GTF model. And the biggest part is that this, in developing this model, physics is what guided me on everything that I produce in this model. It does not violate the laws of physics. Stephen Boltzmann's law, we've seen that it keeps that. Graham is one of the critics on my channel, and he is stuck on this. He does not want to get off of it at all. Um, my model showed consistently and continuously that Stephen Boltzmann's law works in my favor. I'm not against it. I'm very, very, very aware of it, actually. And I actually calculated in there when I talk about heat released into space. It's Stephen Boltzmann's law is actually being factored into it. Um, But for some strange reason, Graham thinks that this is foundational to my model. It isn't. I don't care when the heat actually leaves. The heat doesn't, my time scale isn't compressed into the flood year. I can understand if I compressed it in the flood year or deposit all the heat up at one given time up in the atmosphere, but I don't. So it makes no sense for him to be stuck on this. Um, I really don't care, and I've said this publicly in the videos. I don't really care if the heat left out by the most of the heat left out at the end of the flood, or yesterday, or some of the heat still up there. Because there's some heat that's still in the mantle. I'm okay with all of that. It does not matter to me. It's not foundational to my model. It is part of my model because it deals with the heat release to space. The Earth is not a isolated system. It is. It's not even a closed system. It is an open system, which means energy and matter can come and go, and so heat can actually radiate out into space per Stephen Boltzmann's law. Um, but it's not foundational to my model. The foundational elements to my model is simply that my model is thermally driven. It's driven by the heat. That's what thermally driven means. And it's a positive feedback loop system. Those are the two foundational elements to my model. Um, the As far as the Stephen-Boltzmann's law, it just depends on when the heat is finally completely released from space. And it might release very little uh, by the end of the flood year, and then it does take a while to release in space. I'm fine with that. But there's not just one pathway. There's multiple pathways that it could take before it ever reaches that point. But that is the end game. But it's not. It wouldn't burn up the atmosphere. It just depends. It just change how long it would take for heat to be removed from the atmosphere, depending on how much is actually up there. It scales by t to the fourth powers, which actually works in my favor, especially when I have a thermally driven positive feedback loop system. But some reason Graham is stuck on this. The atmosphere, as I've shown many times, does not burn up. Um, um, relevance to my model, I've already talked about that. Is it foundational to my model? No. The laws of thermodynamics, it would destroy the laws of thermodynamics. That's what they first started trying to accuse me of, but that's before they really understood advection. But advection doesn't follow temperature gradients. It follows mass flow, not heat flow. So it actually doesn't violate laws of thermodynamics. People who say that don't understand thermodynamics nor advection. If you understand both of those concepts, then you know I have not violated the laws of thermodynamics. It would destroy the Earth's EM field. I've actually heard this from old Earth creationists recently. That's not the case. The EM field is actually generated in the outer core, um, uh, um, and that's what they. So it wouldn't actually destroy the EM field at all. It's generated in the mantle. So I don't even know why he said that. Appeals to YAC authorities like Snelling, Baumgartner rate. This happens a lot with a lot of the old earthers. A lot of times the evolutionists, a lot of times appeal to YC authorities in order to argue for the heat problem. But a lot of times these guys are being taken out of context. I've mentioned, when I did a video response series recently on Eric on the heat problem, and she appealed to Vardaman, but the rest of that quote actually has Vardaman appealing to a model that Dr. Russell Humphreys had during the rate project, which was what I mentioned earlier, the expanding of the universe really fast, which was grounded in relativity, by the way, during the flood. So, and so it wasn't that they were saying that it would happen. They were saying that if you calculate up the year, this is how much heat would have generated. But that don't mean that there was no mechanism to take away. They believe that something must have took away all that heat, obviously. So oftentimes they get misquoted or taken out of context. Snelling, like I mentioned that earlier, a lot of people will take the first half of his argument and then leave the second half, which is crucial for his argument, right? Dealing with strawman arguments. The crust is hotter than the mantle. That's false. Not in my model or anyone else's for that matter. You're invoking rapid runaway subduction as advection. That's false. That's a misunderstanding of my model. There's like three forms of advection. I forgot what the third one was, but I know there's three forms of advection. One of them is subduction. I'm not invoking subduction here, so this gets confused sometimes. Mine's mostly invoking uh, the way um, the crustal rock weakens rheology and moving of actual and becomes ductile. It's using the traditional form of advection. Um, Hydrological cooling mechanism, we already discussed that. That was a misunderstanding that they had made on that. I'm not invoking a hydrological cooling mechanism. You don't quantify anything. This happened. It's hard, I can't help but laugh at this whenever I've got critics on my channel that are accusing me of not quantifying anything. And I've heard this in different forms too. Like there was a thing a while back where critics would sit there and say that the only time we had his numbers was when he did it in his GitHub account, and that was 100% false. I presented my numbers back in the depth of the heat problem video. So GitHub was not the first time you had my numbers. You had my numbers there too. Yeah, my numbers all the way back to the depth of the heat problem video. I showed my numbers in the depth of the heat problem, which is my first heat problem video, and then the second heat problem video I did, geothermal feedback model, a mathematical defense, and then a physics defense. I also had my numbers. The only video I hadn't shown my numbers in is the fourth video, which was titled "A Terminological Defense" uh, that I produced and uploaded not too long ago on YouTube. And that's the only one that didn't have any math in it. The fifth video, which will be dropped at the same time as this one, has loads of math in it. And this video also is going to be uploaded. Now this video won't have any math in it really. Well, it did have some math in it, yeah, because I had some math in it with some of the objections. So really the only one that doesn't have math in it is my fourth video, a terminological defense, which wasn't intended to be a math-heavy video anyhow, or evidence-heavy. Whereas my last videos would tend to be evidence and math-heavy and source-heavy, and this one is a little bit math-heavy, um, and has some sources as well. Um, but um, but I quantify everything. Everything in my model I have quantified. So this claim that I have not quantified anything is just false. I honestly expect people to sit there and look at my evidence video and say, "Oh, you haven't presented any evidence." We're not presenting evidence all through it. Or say I haven't presented any math when there's a third of my video has got these math slides in it. you know, uh, just like staring them at in the face. So, yeah, I quantify everything in my model. Now, my model isn't math dependent, meaning the validity of the mechanics isn't based on the math. So I wouldn't focus too much on that. But the math is important for my model, is part of my model. But what it does is it illustrates that my model works. So it is important in that respect. But it's not what makes my model work. If you found a goodness gracious error in the thing and I correct for it, everything will snap back into focus and it would come down the same thing. So it wouldn't actually bring my model down the way a lot of critics thought. But I quantify everything in my model. There's equations, there's numbers, there's math, there's all sorts of stuff. And I've been doing this since day one. So that I don't quantify anything is a complete strawman argument. Your model would burn up the atmosphere. That is false. That's a strawman argument. My model does not burn up the atmosphere at all. Um, Now, did my model fail any tests? This is false too. It didn't fail any tests. There was one test that did not actually properly represent my model. Now, I passed that test too, but it did make some mistakes on the testing itself. So the test had to be abandoned for a better test, a three-phase test. This test never actually made it public. Was never actually. I mean, I talked about it publicly, but it was never presented publicly because I found out that it made some mistakes in terms of representing my model and other mistakes and stuff like that, and had to be abandoned as a result, and that sort of thing. But but even when I did the better test, the three-phase test, it still went into my favor either way. So. Um, Accusations of speculations or arbitrary use of numbers within the model. I actually remember Graham, one of the critics on my channel, I mentioned him before, saying that the 3.5 billion times faster than normal convection and advection speeds was an arbitrary number. And I was like, Graham, you should know better than this. You know that when the mantle heats up, that the flow rate, this increases convection, and you know this for a fact. Okay, we've talked about this before. The scaling of the Rayleigh number, you know all this. You know what the equation shows, and this would accelerate that. And you know this can be calculated in a very specific equation that's found in the literature, can be used to calculate how fast advection is moving. So 3.5 billion times faster is not an arbitrary number. In fact, there's nothing arbitrary in my entire model. Nothing at all. No arbitrariness at all in any aspect of my model. It is 100% got reasons behind everything that I did. The advection speed is based on an actual, or convection speed is based on an actual um, calculation that is done and is found in the peer review literature, in the secular peer review literature. All right. And I also don't speculate anything. Everything in my model is not. There's no speculations in my model. I made sure there's no hypotheticals at all. That was something that I was very adamant about from the beginning. Is that I wanted my model to take what we know and be able to show from that we can get rid of the heat. That was the idea. Because I was trying to show a third alternative to Erica's false dilemma, where she said you either have to invoke a miracle or appeal to unknown physics. In other words, physics that we don't know about yet, and that sort of thing. And I said, nope, you don't have to do that because we can actually work off of the physics we know and still get to that conclusion. And that was the idea. So there was nothing speculative in my model. Solving versus resolving. I have been saying lately resolving a lot. When I talk about the heat problem, I say it resolves the heat problem. I don't say solving as much now because I don't think that there was ever truly a heat problem because the mechanism would have worked during the flood under catastrophic conditions and got rid of the heat. And so I wouldn't think there would be a genuine heat problem. It would still remove the heat fast enough. So I don't want people thinking I'm trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. Whether I would just say I'm resolving the issue. In other words, making a decision that this is the mechanism that was in play during the flood that got rid of that much heat as it was generating during the global flood. And of course, there's more to come. Maybe I'll do other videos on this at some point. All right, let's talk about my conclusion. The geothermal feedback model, or GTF model, demonstrates that the flood, so-called heat problem argument can be addressed within a physically coherent framework when the Earth system is treated as a dynamically coupled thermodynamic system rather than as an isolated block of crust. Critics often treat the crust as a static slab in which internally generated heat accumulates with no efficient removal mechanism. The analysis presented in this defense shows that such assumptions neglect key processes governing planetary heat transport, including temperature-dependent rheology, mantle convection, advection, mass transport, floodwaters, heat capacity, atmospheric energy transfer, and radiation emission to space. When these processes are considered together, the relevant question is not whether heat exists, but whether the combined removal rate exceeds the generation rate. The GTF model shows that under catastrophic flood conditions, multiple feedback mechanisms operate simultaneously to transport heat out of the crust. All right. One of the central criticisms addressed in this analysis concerns the survivability of fission tracks and polonium radial halos in zircon-bearing rocks. The microscale conduction argument demonstrates that zircon crystals cannot behave as thermally isolated fuel rods. The characteristic diffusion timescale across a zircon grain is given by T approximately L squared over alpha, using L approximate 1 times 10 per to the 4th power meters, and alpha approximate 1 times 10 per to the 6th power meter squared per second gives T approximate 0.801 seconds, meaning any zircon host temperature difference dissipates almost immediately. The steady state temperature excess from internal radioactive heating is approximated by delta T, approximate Q R square over 6K. Even under aggressive accelerated decay assumptions, inserting representative values yields temperature differences on the orders of 10 per to the 4th power, subtract 10 per square Kelvin. Because the temperature excess scales with R square, zircon scale self-heating cannot produce thermal runaway independently of the surrounding rock. The temperature of zircon grains therefore tracks the bulk heat rock temperature, confirming that the relevant problem is bulk heat transport rather than isolated crystal overheating. At the large scale of crustal mechanics, temperature-dependent rheology plays a decisive role. Rock viscosity decreases exponentially with temperature according to relation of the form eta 2 over eta 1 equals E to the E over R times 1 over T2, subtract 1 over T1, using E equals 300,000 joules slash mole, and R equals 8.314 joules over or per, no, it's over mole times K. A temperature increase from T1 equals 1400 K to T2 equals 1500 K yields eta 2 over eta 1, approximate 0.179, meaning viscosity drops by roughly a factor of 5 to 6. This dramatic reduction in viscosity allows the hottest and most mechanically weakened crustal material to mobilize first. As deformation proceeds, advection transport or advective transport removes the highest temperature material from the crust and transfers it downward into the mantle reservoir. The mantle with a high capacity, C approximately 4.0 times 10 to 27 power joules per Kelvin, can absorb approximately 6.04 times 10 to 29 power joules of heat with an average temperature increase of only about 150 Kelvin, demonstrating that the mantle acts as an enormous thermal buffer within the system. Once heat is transferred into the surface system through volcanism as the primary transfer mechanism, the floodwaters become an additional thermal reservoir, assuming floodwaters mass M approximate 2.8 times 10 to 21 power kilograms and water heat capacity C approximately 4.0 times 10 cube joules per kilogram times Kelvin. The total ocean heat capacity is C, approximate 1.12 times 10 to 25 power joules per Kelvin. Even a modest warming of delta T, approximately 40 Kelvin, allows the oceans to absorb approximately Q, uh, uh, approximately Q, approximately 4.0 or 4.48 times 10 to 26 power joules of thermal energy. At the same time, large-scale evaporation removes heat through latent heat removal with an evaporation flux ELF approximate 0.0024, if I can see that correctly, 24 Kelvin kilograms per meter square per second. and latent heat evaporation of L approximate 2.5 times 10 to the 6 power joules per kilogram. The latent heat flux becomes alpha approximate 6.0 times 10 cube watts per meter square, integrated over the Earth's surface area. A equals or A approximate 5.1 times 10 to the 14th power um, meter squared. The global latent heat power approaches P approximate 3.06 times 10 to the 18th power watts, demonstrating that the latent heat removal alone constitutes a massive heat transfer mechanism during the flood conditions. Additional cooling mechanisms arise through atmospheric processes. Increased evaporation enhances cloud formation and raises planetary albedo. If a planetary albedo increases from alpha O equals 0.30 to alpha 1 equals 0.45, the reflective solar flux increases by delta F, approximate 51 watts per meter square over their surface area. This corresponds to reflective power of approximate 2.6 times 10 to the 16 power watts. Volcanic aerosols further increases shortwave reflection, contributing additional radiative cooling. These processes um, um, demonstrate that the flood atmosphere and hydrological cycle, floods, heat capacity, evaporation, late heat removal, function as an active thermal regular rather than a passive reservoir. Ultimately, excess heat is dissipated through infrared radiation to space, according to Stephan-Boltzmann's law. P equals sigma AT to the fourth power, raising the effective radiative temperatures from TO equals 255 Kelvin to T hot equals 350 Kelvin, increases the outgoing power by delta P of approximately 2.12 times 10 to the 17 power watts over the flood year. T approximate 3.154 times 10 to the 7th power seconds. This produces radiative heat energy loss of approximately 9.83 times 10 to the 24th power joules. Continued radiative cooling after the flood removes the remaining expelled heat over a time scale of roughly 1.02 times 10 to 10 cube years. Importantly, this radiative temperature represents the effective emission temperature of the planet rather than the temperature of the entire atmosphere, meaning the system can radiate enormous amounts of energy without requiring an enormous atmosphere heated to extreme temperatures. Taken together, the geothermal feedback model integrates mantle heat absorption, rheology weakening, advective transport, hydrothermal circulation, ocean heat capacity, latent heat transfer, atmospheric albedo effects, volcanic aerosol cooling, and infrared radiation into a unified thermodynamic framework. Rather than relying on a single mechanism, the model shows how multiple physical processes reinforces one another in a positive feedback system that continuously transports heat away from the crust. When evaluated quantitatively, the combined heat transfer capacity of these mechanisms exceed the rate of heat generation implied by the flood scenario. Therefore, the quote unquote heat problem is not an insurmountable contradiction, but a resolvable energy transport problem once the full physics of a catastrophically driven Earth system is considered. In conclusion, I like to say my model has been out for approximately a year or so, but yet no critic has yet to refute it. One critic refuses to deal with the foundational elements of the GTF model. Another critic had ignored a major branch of physics while trying to defeat my model. I've had critics assuming the positions, misrepresenting my model, or even attacking typos on slides, but yet the critics is no closer to defeating my model than they did when we first began this journey together. Instead, I have critics who refuse to acknowledge that I had quantified my numbers, been extremely explicit, and have presented you guys with a powerful model and resolution to the so-called heat problem, which I will continue to promote on my channel. To all the critics who wishes to keep on trying to refute my model, all I can say is good luck, and you're going to need it. This ends this video, and I hope you guys like it. But make sure you subscribe to my channel, like the video if you haven't already. Um, and I enjoy making this kind of content. I'm fixing to start school soon. My first class starts on May 18th, so I'm going to try to drop my first video, an evidential defense, and this video, a critical defense. I'm going to be dropping both of these on May 1st and giving the critics 2 weeks to respond to the video. So we'll see how that works. And and hopefully maybe they can. I know they'll try. You know, I don't know what exactly they're going to do, but they got 2 weeks, 2 weeks to make that work. Um, what kind of things I'm expecting? Pounce on typos, probably question my math, even though I did a ton of math here. Um, probably may uh, accuse me of not having any evidence when I presented evidence, accuse me of not quantifying anything when I've quantified everything. um, uh, mm, I don't know. I'll probably get upset, get offended because I just refuted their responses. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. Be honest. I expect some are going to respond. I expect some of the YCs that favor their models, like Stephen and David, they're going to probably be responding. All right, whatever. And we'll see how that goes. But um, any given case, I hope you enjoy this. I enjoy working on this model. It is a great model. I love it. You guys, I include a lot of technical details, but you guys do not have to include those technical details when you're talking to critics about my model. If there's questions or objections or get into the weeds and you don't know the answer to them, just refer back to my video. I've got enough videos on this. I'll probably have more, and so I can be able to answer the questions there. Um, but all that math and stuff, I did that more for the critics than I did it for a lot of the Christians on my channel, simply because they pounce on literally everything I do. Doesn't matter what I do. If I leave out one number, they'll sit there and pounce on it as if as if they just found my kryptonite to my model or something when they haven't. You know. So I have to make sure that I cross every T and dot every I, if nothing else, just to get them off my back on it. So essentially that's what I'm doing with all that math and that sort of thing. But you do not have to remember all that math when you're talking about my model to other people. My model is not really math dependent anyhow. The math is good to illustrate that my model works. You can memorize the conclusions if you want to. Like, yes, he showed that his model does work. It gets rid of the heat in the crust very quickly and that sort of thing. It is a very powerful model. It's very strong. It's been going very strong. I have lots of videos on it, so that's a plus. You know that you can go to back to these videos that I've made on this model. It is a really good model. It's highly plausible, highly probable. Liner gave it a 9 on plausibility and on probability. It is extremely probable. I really love it. So you guys can be able to use this model, and it's more than a response to critics. This makes accurate predictions. It made 5 different predictions that have been successfully verified. Um, it, it shows how we can model the interior of the Earth during the flood. We can model what's going on in the atmosphere during the flood. We can also model volcanic activity during the flood, something that hasn't really been modeled very well in terms of that. Like I showed how this is the intensity of volcanic eruptions escalates up to the day 150, and this allowed me to be able to see where day 150 is because this hasn't really been explored very much. Explored a little bit, but not very much by young Earth creationists on where that would fall in terms of the geological layers. The Permian looks like it is where the day 150 would have fell, as far as that goes. So I think that's cool that I was able to do that with my model. So my model has lots of implications of scientific nature, even beyond resolving the so-called heat problem. So I think it's a cool model. It is very strong. It has outstood the test of time. It has defeated all the criticisms from the critics, even the more sillier, ridiculous ones, and even the stronger ones. But it's able to defeat every single one of them. And so I really like the model. I think it really works. Um, and so I'll see what you think on the comment section. But as for all the critics, listen to me carefully. Okay, I'm only giving you 2 weeks, 2 weeks to uh, watch these two videos and respond to my model. You can respond to both video, that's fine, in that amount of time. But you have exactly 2 weeks from May 1st to May 14th. My classes start May 18th. I may give you an extra couple days if you can come up with something good that would drive my attention to continue responding to it. Okay? If you're doing the same old thing, if you're targeting typos, if you're targeting something that I responded to 50 million times, if we're being repetitive, if we're going around circles with each other, you know, then it probably will end at day 14 because I'm not going to continue it by not if we're not coming up with anything new, if it's the same old, you know. But we'll see what y'all come up with. But I'm not giving you more than that on average, unless you've got something really good. If you got something good enough to draw my attention to it, I may give you an extra couple days. But that's if you do. Um, but 18th is when I start back school, and so I do plan on doing that. And after this video, I do plan, and after we respond to the critics, I'm gonna probably move away from the heat problem subject for a little bit. I will come back to it. I will come back to it later on in the year, um, probably to do a response video to a particular video that Erica has out that I've been wanting to do a response video for some time, and I'll come back to the subject matter for a little bit. But I do want to kind of move away from it from this point. All right, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.